the first our session on alternatives to urban development, youths between multiple crises and future visions. So the way this session is going to be structured is in line with the DSA guidelines. I'll give each presenter in the session. So we've got a total of 4 papers, and I hope that people will have watched the recordings or read the papers in advance. We'll give each contributor 2 minutes, and I'll time this quite strictly to give as much space for discussion. In the 2 minutes, please offer a short summary of your contribution and highlight a question that you would like to discuss in the panel. In the meantime, for participants, if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We'll be using the remainder of the session as an open Q&A session. So I propose we will do the presentations in the running order. So I would like to ask Daniela Beltrame from MIT and Torai Nyamangara from Dialogues and Shelter to please turn on their camera and audio and share a 2-minute reflection. Over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Teura Nyamangara from Dialogue on Shelter, Zimbabwe. It may be very. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I don't think my video will be sustainable because my network is very funny this side. Hopefully it will. So my name is Teura Nyamangara. I work at Dialogue on Shelter in Zimbabwe, mainly with the youth. So our paper with Daniela is actually discussing on issues that has to do with intergenerational issues between what we call Mother Federation, which is a collective of adult people in Zimbabwe who live in formal settlements and their challenges they face, and the younger generation, which are the youth. Who do have also the collectives themselves to try to deal with challenges they face in their settlements in urban areas, especially in Harare, where I'm based. So generally, their main intention as youth is to come up with a strong social movement, a sustainable social youth movement that assists them with dealing with the day-to-day challenges they face. But at the same time, they are the future Mother Federation. They are the future adult collective. So would their priorities help solve the same issues when they grow up? So our paper is centered around that. And the main question for our discussion would be, is it really possible to have a sustainable youth social movement in Zimbabwe with all the issues that we discussed in the paper, with the problems they are facing, with the intergenerational differences? I think for now, that's my contribution.
Thank you very much, Torai, for staying on time and for sharing a really interesting presentation in advance as well. So to stick in the running order, I will now present our own paper that we've contributed to this panel, which is co-authored together with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Casagrande. And it's called Making Visible Indigenous Youth Visions in the Critical Context of El Alto, Bolivia. So in the paper, reflect on how the method of participatory video making allows us to capture the problems, desires, and hopes of urban indigenous youth in the context of multiple crises unfolding in Bolivia. And we zoom in from a larger project, which looks into 4 different case studies, into some of the findings and video making activities we've been undertaking with 4 young women in the city of El Alto, reflecting in particular the role of docu-fiction as a tool to capture issues that are otherwise hard to observe. So we consider participatory video making a helpful method that can contest hegemonic systems of knowledge production, enabling youths to narrate stories through their own lived experience and by deploying aesthetics that appeal to them. But this, reflecting on that in the paper, means deconstructing power dynamics and really sort of addressing these kind of issues seriously. So to foreground the perspective of our indigenous youth collaborators, we have incorporated what we call indigenous development alternatives directly into the methodological process. And we define this term as related to the access, use, and control of cultural, political, economic, material, and social resources. The way we do this is mainly by transferring resources, sharing the whole process of creation, script, and montage with our youth co-researchers, and enabling change through continuous dialogue. So we don't want to advocate that participatory video making is necessarily the only way to foreground youth problems, desires, and futures. And in fact, we would like to discuss with you what are your perspectives? How and in what ways can we best capture youth problems, desires, and futures? Who are the producers of knowledge in youth participatory action research, and how can the different roles and responsibilities of those involved, academics, young people, be negotiated, rethought, and represented? So I'll leave it with that. Thank you very much. And I will be handing over, I think, directly to Margot Rubin from the University of Cardiff to please also introduce our paper and a question in about 2 minutes.
Great, thank you so much, Philip. The project that I'll be talking about is a comparative piece between Hawassa in Ethiopia, just outside of Addis Ababa, and Ekangala, a peripheral community located to the north of Pretoria in South Africa. The work was really trying to understand the youth experiences of housing and the work nexus. And sorry, excuse my voice, I'm a bit sick. And to try and understand the experiences that people have of being young people in these particular peripheral locations, which are non-central locations, and the contribution that work and housing makes to their lives and livelihoods. It was a co-produced piece of work between in a series of academic teams, the University of Sheffield, the University of Cardiff, the University of Witwatersrand, and the University of Hawassa, together with 27 youth representatives who were taken from the local communities in Hawassa and in Ekangala. And basically, we asked the youth to really help us to produce the research instrument, and then to go out, and then we trained them and they engaged with us. And they went out and did a series of surveys for us. They each did about 15 different surveys of other youths in their particular areas, asking questions around the same kinds of topics. And then we conducted a series of life history interviews with them as well. So the youth representatives were both objects of study, but also were the subjects of study, and also were active participants in co-producing the work that came out. What was very interesting is that coming out of it, what we found was that young people were caught up in this situation of what could be called waithood, this perennial state of liminality, this inability to move past being youths in many ways. They were forced to maintain a lack of autonomy within their homes, unemployed, unable to earn money, unable to move to the next step within any kind of adult transition. But at the same time, they were hugely agenic. They were not passive recipients of these particular situations. They were people who moved, who rebelled, who contested the sense of being in a situation of waithood. And the question that I'd like to pose is waithood a useful concept in actually understanding youth in the global south, or is it too restrictive in trying to consider the particular situations that we find ourselves, that the youth find themselves in? I'm so sorry, my voice is terrible. I do apologize.
Thank you very much, Margot, again for a succinct summary. I'm passing on apologies from Sophie Legros, based in LSE, who cannot be with us today due to health problems. But she has shared a very short summary, and I'll try to wrap this up also in 2 minutes, and then we can move straight into the discussion. So Sophie's paper, which is called Youth in Medellin's Urban Periphery: Unyielding Hopefulness Against Inconsistent Temporalities of Everyday Life, is based on a subset of urban youth in Medellin, Colombia, that participate in community and city-wide processes and organize to develop alternative futures for urban development. So there has been extensive literature on the temporal states of waithood and unrealized aspirations, so making a clear connection also to the previous paper, and on hustling and the urban struggle to survive. So the paper highlights how the juxtaposition of these inconsistent temporal states creates tensions, frustrations, and anxieties in youth lives. It identifies unyielding hopefulness as a radical position and feeling, a form of agency through which youth in peripheral neighborhoods develop aspirations and envision a dignified life despite multiple crises and unjust exclusions. It emphasizes the collective and solidarity dimension of aspirations and hope. This includes a recognition that many youths in Medellin are parents and have aspirations for their children and future generations. The paper draws attention to important gender dimensions around work, family, and care, not always explicitly recognized in the literature on informality, everyday urban life, and youth studies. The paper traces youth's disruptive practices in the family and labor markets and in their social and political participation that challenge criminal economies, the unequal gender order, and aggressive models of masculinity, and the elite's exclusionary model of progress. So these actions, youth call for more equal, inclusive, and collective urban futures that recognize the value and contribution of the periphery. So her question to us and to everyone in this discussion is, what does a gender and intersectional perspective bring to our understanding of urban youth challenges and futures of development? So we're wrapping up now at this stage with a series of mini presentations and with a series of provocations and questions that were shared by each of the authors, who, by the way, have also shared some great video presentations and papers, which you can check out in advance after the session. I have copy-pasted a couple of questions that I have prepared to each of the individual authors prior to this session, not for Sophie, as she is not with us. So my suggestion would be, was people are proposing questions and comments in the chat, which will be following, that we hand over, first of all, to Daniela and Zoirai, and afterwards to Margot and her team to address some of these questions and to pick up maybe one of the questions that was shared by the presenters. And again, you get about 2 minutes to share reflection, and then we can open up for wider discussion. So Zoirai, would you like to go first? So the questions in the chat for you are, what is the gender composition of SDI's youth movements? How are youth federations formed? To what extent do youth movements have autonomy over their own affairs? And how does SDI mobilization resonate with youths? What is the precise purpose, for example, of savings among the SDI youth? So over to you.
Okay, thank you. So I think one of the questions that have been asked was, what is the gender composition of SDI's youth movements? I think on this one, there are both a lot of female and also a lot of boys. But I can say it's something that we haven't done formally, like having a gender mainstreaming. But the groups, like they've some of them are mixed, where you can find boys and girls. Some of them, they are boys only, some of them are girls only. And most of the times they are actually a group of youth that do have youth with common interest. So usually you find the group doesn't have actually a 50-50 representation when it comes to the solidarity groups. Dani, do you want to add something, or should I continue?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I was a few minutes late, but I've heard Theo did an amazing job. So yeah, just to complement what Theodora was saying, there is no formal registry for SDI Youth or for KYC, the Know Your City program. But what SDI affiliates have started to notice, and particularly in Harare, is that the youth groups that are devoted to savings, that continue the practice of savings, are more girls and women. There are more girls and women in them, and especially there's a presence of teen mothers. And there it seems to be, this is something that we would want to inquire further about, there seems to be a higher level of organization where there are more women in the group. There seem to be bookkeeping and regular meetings, more so than in groups where it's predominantly boys, and where there are more boys or men, boys and men, groups tend to be more interest-based or maybe income generating, and not so focused on savings, right? Theo, I think this is pretty much sums it up.
Okay, thank you, Danny. I think the next question is, how are youth federation formed? For example, organically or by themselves or through incentivization by SDI? And also, to what extent do youth movements have autonomy of their own affairs or practices? So the youth federations are formed through mobilization by the mother federation mainly. So they're the ones that mobilize youth to form these solidarity or youth groups. And when it comes to the issue of autonomy, they do have relative autonomy when it comes to projects where the SGI has funded some specific youth projects. They actually can decide what they want to do in terms of maybe initiatives or activities. They have some autonomy in doing that. But when it comes to issues such as strategic plans, they actually like bonded to mother federation. There's not much autonomy for them to like operate like separately. I think Danny can also add on that.
Yes, no, I think you said it beautifully. There's relative autonomy, and autonomy seems to be more project or activity based. And then when it comes to more issues of maybe the creation of a strategic plan or an overall north or a direction, there seems to be a lot more tension between generations. Normal tension, right? But still, it is there nonetheless. I think the final question was about SDI mobilization, right? And the push to form savings groups, and whether this resonates with youth and what's the purpose around it. Theo, I can take it, and then I can start, and then you can complement if there's anything else. So savings have been the sort of the main ritual for the federations for years now. To the point where a group is categorized as active if they are saving, if they are in fact saving. So nowadays, the current economic situation in Zimbabwe with hyperinflation makes it next to impossible to do savings and have them actually mean anything from one day to the next. And I myself am Argentinian, so I also know a little bit about this. So today, what is happening in Harare is that we're seeing youth groups mobilize more based on common interests. And if there is saving, the savings are more for income generating activities, enterprises mainly, rather than for land or housing, which was the main focus of previous generations. So those are sort of the main differences. Theo, would you like to add anything?
Sorry, in respect of time, and to give the others also a bit of space to react to questions both in the chat and previously posed. Maybe I can hand over to Margot, and I think of the author team we've also got Sarah Charlton here in the group. So over to you. Would you like to maybe pick up on one or two of the questions posed to you? Can also see that Majoke Osterom has put in a couple of more questions into the chat. So feel free to pick what you want to engage with.
Great. I think I'd like to just respond to two of the questions that came through. The one that I think is really interesting is a question that Majoke asked about in the nature of politics of informality. And one of the things that we had real difficulty with was negotiating our way through the informal politics within Ekangala, to the point where we were supposed to hold a one-day workshop with youth representatives from Ekangala. They were supposed to travel from their homes to Johannesburg, which is about an hour and a half, no, it's about 2.5 hours by bus. And we did it the one weekend, that was absolutely fine. We did the second weekend, And the bus with all the youth representatives was stopped by the local taxi organization, who refused to allow the buses to go through because they claimed that we had not paid a permit. We had not applied for a permit to them, and we had not had their permission to transport young people from the area to the university. And they demanded somewhere in the order of about 15,000 Rand, which is about just under £1,000, about $1,000, to allow to release the youth representatives who they were effectively holding hostage. And what we had to do was negotiate with these taxi drivers and to get the release of the bus and whatever else. And what we quickly realized is how powerful and entwined local politics were in Ekangala, and how difficult they were to navigate. And we had engaged with some people within the kind of who we thought were kind of community leaders and whatever else, but we had not done a full mapping of the nature of the informal politics within the area. And so needed to really engage with a deep ethnographic understanding of who the political players were and the power that they wielded within these environments, which we just weren't as aware of as we could have. And we've done work in this area before. So, and that was quite different to Hawassa, which didn't have these kind of very localized informal networks of politics that were quite as entwined. And they didn't affect the research as much as they did in Ekangala, where we really had to navigate very carefully through these networks and this intertwined nature of local politics. So that was it was a learning lesson for us, and it was something that we then had to rectify within the study, and speaks to some of this kind of evolving and incremental nature of research, and this way that you have to kind of work back and forth to be able to negotiate these difficult places. And then yeah, it was quite terrifying. And then what are we adding to? I think the idea, the question around what do we add conceptually to this notion of waithood, to these ideas of precarity, I think is that they're not a zero-sum game. It's not that people exist in states of waithood in completeness or situations of agency, but they move in between moments of waithood and moments of hustling and moments of straining, as Oldfield and Finn put it, or as hustling as Tiem puts it. So I think what we have to recognize is these moments of contestation, these moments of disruptions, moments of rebellion that come back and forth, and how hygienic young people actually are within these, but also try to recognize the kind of structural and systemic things which contribute to their waithood, and see the moments when they can fight against it and when they can't, and what they and to really try to complexify and nuance this notion of waithood itself. I hope that helps. I think I've run out of time.
Thank you. I'm going to take up a couple of questions that were, I'd like to take up Sophie's question, the benefit, for example, of an intersectionality framework to make sense of youth futures. That's something we are doing indirectly in our project. However, we consider intersectionality and its roots sort of in US American Black feminist thought as not particularly appropriate for the context we're working with. So we are working with the concept of Czechi, which is promoted by Amara, indigenous scholar and sociologist Sylvia Riveri-Kuzikanki, who basically says that instead of different categories always cutting and cross-cutting with each other, they may coexist, and that is something that we observe in the articulations of our indigenous youth co-researchers, who on the one hand live in the city. It's worthwhile noting, in the Bolivian context, is conventionally associated as a non-indigenous space. They aspire to lead an urban life, a modern urban life there, was at the same time maintaining their indigenous traditions, but also challenging some of the understandings of tradition, of indigeneity as proposed by their parents and by their grandparents. I think another cross-cutting element that seems to be coming through in the presentation on South Africa and Ethiopia, and in our presentation, and I had the privilege to listen to Paula Meth, who's one of my colleagues here in the department, about advances on this project before, is really this notion of boredom and of waiting, and how this is not necessarily just a permanent state, but that people always articulate, young people always articulate alternatives and dreams. And I think in our project, this came really out through fictive scenes, through dreaming exercises, and really led us also into discussions of how these ideas and dreams are actually enacted in practice, and we're capturing that in the longer talk and in the film that we're currently preparing with them. So yeah, just so much to that. I would like to hand over to the wider audience to see whether there's broader questions. I can already see that we've got members of the next round of the session in this one. So if there's reactions, reflections by them, by any other participants, or if speakers would like to share further thoughts at this moment, please go ahead. Sarah.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I hope I'm sort of visible and audible. I just wanted to add to the question that was asked by Marioka on kind of where we're hoping to go in terms of conceptual frameworks. So I'm going to preface that by saying it's still very much a work in progress, but that the project as a whole is really focused on trying to make sense of the work housing nexus for youth. So what we are calling this kind of complex intersection and interrelationship between work and housing in the two contexts. So it's there that I think some of our work is heading in terms of kind of conceptual aspects, and in terms of that sort of relationship and the way in which housing is implicated in ways in which people are able to sustain themselves or not, and the two very different contexts around how work is, how housing in particular is delivered or accessed by youth. In terms of that, we're looking at aspects such as the kind of the different dimensions of that work housing nexus, the spatial relationships, the financial nexus, and the different dimensions within that kind of financial relationship, some of the temporal convergences and disconnections, the differentiation that we can unpack around that nexus by ethnicity, by gender, by childhood narratives, by components in which parents are involved in that sort of housing work relationship. I might be speaking a little bit cryptically around these kinds of themes that we're trying to unpack, but it's hopefully over the next couple of months, it's in that kind of that kind of focus area that we're really hoping to make some kind of contribution by drilling down into this relationship around work and housing, particularly for youth.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And building on Marioka's question around urban informal politics, I'd like to come in on this topic as well, because across the cases we're currently working with, and especially in the context of our youth collaborators in El Alto, informality in many ways is a way of life. Most of them work informally to generate an income, a livelihood, and it always seems to be a tension with this aspiration to become what in Spanish would be called profesionales. So we want to become professionals, which essentially means working in public or private sector jobs. The interesting element, and this is captured also very briefly in our longer presentation, is that in order to become a professional and to leave informal sector work behind, one actually has to engage with informal politics, which oftentimes can be understood in many ways with the sort of party political configurations of El Alto, and also with the union structure model within the city, where basically if you're not belonging to the right political party, or you're not a member of the right political organization, you simply will not be able to enter as a professional. So in many ways, we're trying to conceptualize that through Latin American notions of the popular economy, which look at informality not just as an economic and lived reality, but also as a political reality that in many ways shapes people's everyday lives and also has a strong impact on their aspirations. So maybe, reflecting on time, I would like to hand over to Daniela and Torai. Maybe you would like to share some further reflections or respond to some of the issues that were raised in the chat. At the same time, anyone has questions, further comments, please include them in the chat or just raise your hand, and we do still have about 9 minutes. Okay, was that a sign that we're handing over to Marioke first, and then afterwards we can hand back to you, Daniel?
Well, thanks. I don't want to cut you off, Daniela, but I think I'll throw in thanks everyone for the presentation and discussion. I liked how the different presentations also touch on weight-hood in one way or the other. And I think the policy discourse on weight-hood has really overemphasized the lack of work aspect. But I think some of the presentations, like how Alcinda Onwana has conceptualized it, it's a lot more of that. It's also about respect and status and autonomy. So, and we've criticized that actually in a paper with James Sandberg that I've written that in the past, so that might but I think that the housing work nexus might actually also contribute to further debate on weighted and what it really is, if it's useful. Because I think it's become this concept that we all have to cite if we work on youth and livelihoods. So I think it's valuing other aspects of the concept that come through in the presentations, I think.
Thank you very much. Daniela, Torai, would you like to come in to share some further reflections responding to some of the questions that are raised in the chat or that were raised by the other presenters for sort of a wider provocation within the panel?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm here, Dani. So I think I would want to reflect about the situation of youth in Zimbabwe, and in connection to how we can build a sustainable youth network. With the current situation, current economic conditions in Zimbabwe, the youth are migrating in search of better economic opportunities in nearby countries and even in the diaspora. So the next thing, you have a group of youth who are so motivated to, to change their lives, to improve their communities. The next thing, they are no longer there, and you are starting over and over again. And also we have like the Mother Federation. They get upgraded their settlements. They are no longer living in formal settlements. Their children are going to school, and their life is actually changed. And they now have their children have different priorities. And then that means we have to move on to another new, maybe informal settlement to mobilize again. So really, it has been a question that has been going on in my head, and also the people I work with. It's really complicated to have a sustainable youth network in Zimbabwe as it is. And I don't know, maybe something that we haven't thought of, maybe ideas on how we can come up with a sustainable youth network, considering all these difficulties and the changing environment around youth. I don't know if Danny wants to add.
I just wanted to add the consideration, something that we've started talking about and would like to sort of look into further, is the role of international NGOs and other donors in creating sustainable youth movements or a sustainable youth chapter of a movement. Some of the youth leaders that SDI has been, like they say, grooming in a good way, of course, have usually become like, they have grown to become points of contact for international NGOs, such as Oxfam or Plan International. And because they are points of contact for these NGOs and have a sort of more sustainable source of income or an occupation, it is hard for them to continue being in the leadership of youth organizations, mobilizing other youth. So looking into this and understanding how it plays for the continuity and the intergenerational building of a movement is also of interest to us.
Thank you very much. I can see a hand by Simba Rashe. Would you like to turn on your camera and microphone and share your comment or question, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. No, I just want to follow up on the presentation that was made, and especially looking at the informal settlements. I just wanted to ask what is the place of politics, especially with regards to the associations and the networks, because when you look at Zimbabwean informal settlements, they are very political and politicized spaces, and you tend to have cooperatives and other associations that are very political. So in terms of the ways in which young people organize within these settlements, what is the place of politics, and how is the fractured and factional political dynamics within the Zimbabwean context implicated? How are they implicated in the way in which young people organize in these networks? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Over to Daniela and Terai, and can I ask you to please be succinct, because we have to close the session in 2 minutes. However, just to say this right now, there is a session allocated to our panel which doesn't have any presentations, and that will begin at, if I remember correctly, at 1:50, so after the next round. So we can continue the conversation there, and I'd invite all the presenters for this session to join and to also continue the conversation at that stage after we've listened also to the contributors from the next session. But over to you, Daniela and Terai, and I think after that we will have to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I agree with you that the informal settlements are really sensitive when it comes to politics. And as we are in the campaign period for the 2023, it's actually even worse. But what I've noticed with working with these youth in informal settlements, wherever they are benefiting something, they actually respect that kind of system. So if we are going to have, for example, a meeting in an informal settlements with the youth, they will definitely tell you before, don't come at 10. Actually, there is a political meeting and we don't want our meeting that has to do with the youth, the SDI youth, mix up with the politics. They find ways to navigate and actually balance the two. So when you are like working with them, mobilizing them, it's like the politics and the federation structures, they are just two parallel structures that doesn't mix. Sometimes you find a youth who is a federation youth who is actually a political leader. We actually have a youth from Epworth in Harare who is actually campaigning to be an MP, but you will never know if you see him doing the federation work. So they actually find ways to navigate this politics as much as it is very sensitive in their informal settlements. They find ways to balance the two. It's very, very interesting. I hope I have tried to answer you. Maybe Danny, if you want to add.
Okay, thank you very much. This this is the end of the first session. It's the first time I'm running a 40-minute session, and it seems to be actually working quite all right. Like before, we do have the privilege of 40 minutes of session without any papers that need to be presented. So I really encourage those of you interested in the topic and interested in continuing the discussion to join that at 1:50. But before that, we'll be continuing in half an hour, and we'll be listening to 4 further presentations. I think most of the presenters are already in this session, so worth reminding you have to join a different Zoom meeting for that. So basically go back to the program, click on join part B of the session, and we'll be seeing each other in 30 minutes. So thank you very much for the contributions and for sharing really insightful and interesting presentations and papers. And see you hopefully all in half an hour. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.